Masala now. I've been playing you a piece of audio that I've taken from the BBC Asian network because I found it really, really interesting, actually. And it was an interview in which Nihal, the presenter, did an interview with David Cameron on the Asian network about all kinds of issues, a number of Asian issues. And one of which was this issue about 1984 and Operation Blue Star. Now, I've been playing you this particular piece of audio. Have a listen to this.
What I would say is we had an inquiry when this...
An independent inquiry?
Well, we had an inquiry which got to the bottom of what had happened, that revealed all the government documents and papers, and I think a good job was done. And I think we should draw a line under that. At the end of the day, the people who were responsible for what happened were, people in the Indian government, not the British government. And I think the report showed that very comprehensively.
So, as a British Sikh, does that satisfy you? Are you satisfied with the inquiry that was held? Because I know there's a number of people out there who won't be satisfied, whereas there might be some people out there who are thinking, well, actually, 30 years on, yes, let's move on, that they agree with David Cameron. Whatever your view, get in touch with me tonight, 03453 009956. Let's now have a word with Sarbjit Singh, who's from Rajana TV, based in Birmingham. Welcome to the programme, Sarbjit.
Thank you very much.
Sarbjit, let's start by asking, what is Rajana TV?
Rajana TV is it's a YouTube channel which can be found obviously on YouTube, and it's basically giving in English some of the sort of genocides and the massacres that have taken place post 1984, pre 1984, and during. And it's just sort of putting it in bite-sized chunks, so youngsters who may not be sort of au fait with the Punjabi language can sort of understand what went on, because for too long we've had slogans, we've had shouting from stages, but we haven't had real education. So we're just trying to get some kind of education across as to what actually happened to Sikhs in India.
And when you're explaining what actually happened to Sikhs in a simplistic term, you must hear all the kind of, there's rumours, there's a lot of speculation. How do you then decide what is fact, what is fiction, what is rumour, what is speculation?
I think that's the sort of duel that every sort of broadcaster or journalist goes through, is am I portraying history the way I want it to be portrayed, or am I putting my slant on it? And I think we all have that to some extent, but ultimately I think when you go through witness testimonies of people who were actually there at the time, and then you go through some affidavits and you go through some of the actual statistics that are out there, then I think you get a pretty good picture about what's going on. And your question is particularly poignant, because a lot of the statistics, a lot of the witness testimonies are sort of disappearing in India, so it's vital, I think, at this stage to talk to some of the victims and get their side of the story, because 30 years on they're dying themselves, and so are the perpetrators. So this sort of history has, is in danger of disappearing from the history book. So it's important to get that data as we can. So we've spoken to victims in India, we've also taken these witness testimonies, and we're sort of trying to get their point across and try and tell their story.
What do you make of David Cameron's comments this week? So he's saying there's been an inquiry, that British Sikhs should basically draw a line under it. And he's kind of saying, look, it's the Indian government's situation. They should kind of deal with this, not the British government. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that? I think to some extent David Cameron is right. A gun is nothing unless someone's pulling the trigger. So even if the British government provided some kind of assistance and strategy, the people who use that are the Indian government. But the point that we are trying to sort of stress to the British government is that they had no right to get involved and meddle in sort of Sikh/Indian affairs. For throughout the 80s, they were harping on about how Sikhs and Punjabis were an affluent community, and they had high literacy rates, and they'd sort of contributed to the economy and sort of integrated themselves in. And then on the same hand, they've been told that Sikhs are some kind of ardent terrorists in India and they need to get rid of them. When they were approached to say that we want to get this man out from the Golden Temple, Sant Janel Singh Khalsa Pindranwale, who was literally sort of the Sikh Pope at the time, I asked people the same question, because we've done a video response to the Cabinet Secretary's report on British collusion, is that if the Italian government were approaching this British government saying, we need your expertise and advice on how we can kidnap the Pope from the Vatican, can you please give us some advice? Would this country entertain that thought? I don't think they would. So we are trying to stress to this government that we do want full disclosure. And some of the things that were written in the letters were like, Harmandir Sahib, which is the Golden Temple, is completely out of control. Well, what does
out of control look like at the Golden Temple complex? 2 months before the Golden Temple complex was attacked, 45,000 people had been initiated into the Sikh faith. That isn't something that's out of control. So I think not enough groundwork was even done to see what were the Sikh demands, what about the civil unrest that was taking place, that in a democratic way, there was no guns. So we're trying to say to the British government, David Cameron as well, is that they had no right to meddle in those affairs. Whenever we go to Hyde Park every year to commemorate Operation Blue Star, we are told as a response from the British government that it's a matter of internal affair for the Indian government. Well, was it not an internal affair in 1984 when they were asked for their help?
When you're kind of confronted with these kind of barriers, if you like, to kind of have the transparency in all of this, and you want answers, and there's a lot of questions unanswered, and you're often, as you might put it, fobbed off from the British government. What can you realistically do about that? Because when you've got David Cameron saying that on the radio, and then you've got groups of British Sikhs who are constantly calling for justice, and you're organising all kinds of events, how do you deal with that? Because it's like 30 years on and still it's the same thing. There's been, and then David Cameron saying, look, there's been an inquiry. But why do you think the British government don't want to allow an independent inquiry?
I think there's probably quite a few factors. One of the factors is that Sikhs aren't an interesting project to get involved in. We don't have masses of oil where they can go in on the pretext of sort of...
Do you think it's about oil, though?
I think it's business. I think it's a lot of things are trade. Even when the British collusion actually happened, I've read the whole entire report. I've even read the appendix and the supporting documents, and they all point to one thing, that we've got to sell some helicopters to India, and we need to keep this kind of bilateral trade relation going. At the same time, Indira Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, two female prime ministers in a world dominated by men, saw themselves as sort of the iron ladies of the world, and we've got to stick together. So I think it was about business, and I think it remains business, because if you're going to Iraq and Afghanistan and you're invading those kind of countries based on the pretext that you're trying to help civilians and human beings, well, today Sikhs are still dying. It's not that they've been killed, 250,000 over the course of 30 years. 3 Sikhs in the past 3 years have been killed in peaceful protests without a single investigation taking place or even making the news in the UK. So if humanity and if helping civilians is at the core of your agenda, then why aren't you going into India? Why aren't you demanding an investigation? But at the same time, we have to be realistic about this. No sovereign country is going to go to another sovereign country and say, right, give us all your dirty deeds and show us all the sort of massacres. That's just not going to happen, which sort of leaves Sikhs in a limbo. Neither do we expect anything from Britain, and we can't expect anything from India, the sort of state that's organised and covered up the massacre. So
it is a definite kind of vicious circle going on. Like you said, Sikhs are in limbo, but yet you're still organising an event in a few weeks. Yeah,
and the reason why we're organising that event is because there is a real danger, like I've mentioned before, of this episode in our history disappearing. And I even say to the people who are listening, we've all got people who passed away. You know, they've passed away peacefully. My grandma passed away peacefully. Her family was around her. We do a prayer in her name every year. We've never forgotten her. And then we are actually supposed to forget 250,000 Sikhs that have been butchered just because of their faith, just because of their belief system and their lifestyle. So I think if we allow ourselves to forget, then it doesn't say anything about our humanity either. We don't forget the Great War. In I think this month or in the next month, we'll be celebrating 100 years of the Great War. We never forget the Jewish massacres. We don't forget the Cuban Missile Crisis. But that doesn't turn into some psychotic individuals that hate the Germans or no. It's just lessons to be learned from history. And so the reason why we have these candlelight vigils is they light a candle, not because it's just sort of for lighting a candle's sake. It's sort of like a pledge to say that we won't forget those souls, because the dead don't have a voice. And a lot of the people in Punjab, particularly Punjab in India, they still are suppressed because the head of Punjab police is a known sort of person who's got human rights abuse cases as long as my arm, and he's in charge of law and order in Punjab. So we're not just saying that let's remember the dead. What we're trying to tell people is that the massacres continue, because the people who organise these, now David Cameron is telling us to draw a line, the people who organise these massacres, say November, Delhi 1984, or even Operation Blue Star, they were MPs at the time. Fast forward a couple of years later, and they enter the cabinet of India, the India's cabinet. They become ministers.
Influential figures.
Influential figures, yeah. So in fact, they've actually been rewarded. just today, I'm going to meet a woman who lost about 7 members of her family during Delhi. She lost her brothers, sons, she lost her husband, and the people who've organised it, she's actually witnessed them, she's put them on a piece of paper, she's filed a police report, only to see those same people running government. So how do we draw a line under this?
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so very complex, isn't it, when you've got a situation like that, because like you say, there's influential figures involved with this, and you know, for people that are just British Sikhs, that just want their voices heard, like you said, there's this these events that are happening, and you want them to be remembered, but where do you go? You very much, like you say, are in limbo, but all you can do is put on events.
Yeah.
Is there anything more that you're doing?
What we are trying to do is, other than these events, is just to try and keep the memory alive, because they're sort of subdued. They've been sort of beaten into submission. Where even if you talk about human rights in India, we've had human rights activists who've been made to disappear in India just because they've sort of highlighted some of the human rights abuses and the violations. So what if we have to be their voice? Those people in India, they look towards us because we do live in a democratic country. No one's going to pick us up in the middle of the night. No one's picking me up in the middle of the night for being RajoanaTV in this country. But had I been RajoanaTV in India, I don't know what my fate would be.
Wow.
So I think we take it upon ourselves to sort of tell their story.
And why do you feel so passionate about this? I know that there are many Sikh that are very, very passionate about this issue, but why do you take it upon yourself and then feel that you have to present these kind of messages across as a British Sikh? As
a British Sikh, the reason why I find it, I think it's important to sort of stress these issues is, number one, I think, had my grandparents not decided to move to this country, I could have been in one of those illegal cremation grounds. I could have had a burning tyre wrapped around my neck. I could have been taken to the border of Pakistan and shot dead. I could have had my whole family decimated. So I can't divorce myself from those people back there. And also, like I said, I'm a student of history, and I want to learn lessons from history, and I want to make sure no one ever dies. Not just my people. There's Muslims in Gujarat who faced massacres, and India has a whole list of human rights violations of a lot of ethnic minorities. So it's about getting that point across, that the world's greatest democracy, self-proclaimed greatest democracy, in actual fact is crushing minorities under its boots. So it's about sort of just highlighting that and not being fobbed off with these sort of gestures of, yes, we've got a Sikh Prime Minister and a head of this. Well, we did have a Sikh Prime Minister, because the Sikhs on the ground, their story is completely different to what's being portrayed in the international media.
Sabja, I tell you what, it's been fascinating talking to you. I've had a few texts that have come in, one of which says, Khalistan Zindabad.
Yeah.
Now explain that, because I kind of look at that and say, look, in the cricket world, Pakistan Zindabad, and it's kind of like, kind of bigging up the Pakistan team. But when you see a text like that, what would that mean? Okay,
what that means, that's probably somebody who feels a bit passionate about what's gone on and what Sikhs have fed. Khalistan Zindabad ultimately means long live Khalistan. Khalistan is it's an abstract notion at the moment, but it's the demand from Sikhs for a separate homeland. Because, when we talk about November, Delhi 1984, 30 years on, I ask a lot of people the same question. What has changed in India to make sure these massacres never happen again? What rule, what law has been enacted to safeguard us? And that's nothing. A lot of people in the community, including myself, and I say that openly, believe that we can only safeguard ourselves if we have a government that will look after us, where we can live in peace and harmony and won't be persecuted and subjugated because of our culture.
And which government are you talking about? The British government or
the Indian government? We're talking about the Indian government here, yeah, the Indian government.
But do you feel safe with the British government?
I think on a day-to-day basis we feel safe, and if you close your eyes and you just concentrate on work and family and driving a nice car, then you're very safe. But I think if you open your eyes even 10% to see what's going on around the world, especially, as a Sikh, then I think that our religion sort of is in a refugee status where we're neither here nor there. And I think that's where the text comes from, that Sikhs themselves need to start controlling their own destiny. Wherever we go, we're seen as sort of integrated people. We believe in Sarbat Pala, which means the goodness to all of mankind. The word Sikh isn't even mentioned in our scriptures. That's how sort of we consider humanity, our brotherhood. But at the same time, we expect a level of respect back. And if we don't get that, we need to sort of look at different avenues.
Sabja, it's been really, really good speaking with you today. Can you remind us about this event, where it is, when it is?
Yeah, it's in the 1st of November, and it's between 3 and 6 p.m, and that will be outside the old Birmingham Library. I think there'll be speeches from 5 o'clock, and people could come, light a candle. And it's not an exclusively Sikh event. Traditionally, we've had Muslims, Hindus, we've had English, black people, Chinese coming and lighting candles. And there's always one sort of factor amongst all these people when they do come. They're always shocked, thinking, oh, I didn't know Sikhs were being killed in India or had been killed. They thought, well, you know, we're from India. India's a great country, but sort of they come and they sort of learn that there's a bigger episode in our history that exists and people don't know about.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you
really
very much.
appreciate the time you've taken out for this, and it'd be really good to